the news of the day, every day seems to be the economy, right? And so if you read forecasts, you're pretty sure that either the economy is getting better, getting the worse, or staying the same.
Right. It's one of those.
We're pretty sure.
Yeah.
So
sometimes all.
Sometimes all three. Yes, on the same day. So from sort of the consumer public perspective, it's sort of a mystery how economists go about making these forecasts. We read about them all the time. We read about the predictions. Where are they coming from?
I have no idea. Most economists don't try to predict. Most economists try to understand and at least interpolate and extrapolate. But what we learned a long time ago is if we can forecast it all, it's maybe marginally better than a little bit. And so the forecasts that are out there, I mean, they're basically people's best opinion on extrapolating from events now and hoping that nothing out of the ordinary occurs in the meantime, like a Libyan, almost civil war,
right,
or an uprising in Egypt. I mean, who would have thought 2 months ago that what's going on in the Middle East would have happened? So those sorts of things happen all the time, and it's almost the butterfly problem, right? It flaps its wings in Japan, and you've got a hurricane somewhere else.
So, in a sense, an economic forecast, even if it had everything figured out, would only be as good as sort of the social, political, cultural forces of the world, and we don't know those at all, it seems.
It's like forecasting weather. We can maybe make a forecast a little ways out, but the further you go, the less likely it is to be accurate, because the more likely it is something unforeseen will intervene.
So we have a science of economics.
Right.
And we have other sciences that look at we call it complex dynamic systems, right? That's the buzz now. And it had been the case that science thought that to have a sense that we know what we're doing, right, the gold standard was predictive accuracy.
Right.
If a science can't be predictive, of what use is it to society, to academia, to government?
Right.
Why should we have economists if we're not going to be able to know what's coming?
My students ask me that all the time, right? And then it's usually right before a test. But really, I guess the understanding of what's going on is really what's important to understand, right? I mean, we need to, when events occur, we not only want to know what's going to happen next, but what just happened. And I think economists focus more on that. Now, obviously, if you're a market watcher or somebody trying to make investments, then again, you're going to be trying to forecast the future. And if you're trying to sell something, you're probably likely trying to point out why you should or shouldn't do something. But an economist doesn't really try to get into that because, I hope, it doesn't sound like it these days, an economist is on TV like right now all the time. But you do have to be humble, because in the end, the weather person is,
probably doing a better job than you are.
And they're also the victim of a lot of jokes, right?
Right.
They're the person, the scapegoat, and an economist. There's always an economist who's wrong.
Right.
So.
Precisely. So let's go with that, right? So if economics has been called the dismal science, and I'm not sure whether that's because it's dismal in making forecasts, or its forecasts are usually dismal, but
it was the latter.
It was the latter. So I guess the question I would have is I hear the phrase more and more about economic literacy.
Right.
So if it's not about prediction and it is about understanding, what are the hazards, say, for the public or for government officials? What sorts of economic confusions, misunderstandings do we have in terms of the general public that are to our detriment?
Well, I think the simple things like thinking the market can only go up, that a house is always a great investment, that you should buy a house for the investment value. I mean, those are recent events where, they certainly aren't true historically. It didn't end well recently. So that might be economic literacy. So how much debt can you afford? So when we talk about economic literacy, it's not so much about economics and understanding demand and supply, so much as just reasonable, prudent decision making, instead of dreaming and wishing it were true and then acting as if it was. Recognizing that certain things are unlikely to persist if they're occurring now, and sometimes understanding that things that are too good to be true likely are as well.
Okay, so I mean, one of the hazards of even weather prediction, right, is that, I mean, the most accurate prediction is usually that tomorrow will be just like today. But
right.
what we're really interested in are those times where tomorrow is much different than today. And that,
right.
in terms of economics, seems to be the interesting stuff as well.
That and what happens next week, right? So we
Right.
always want to know what's around the corner that we can't see.
So I can see that for personal economics, the debt load, investment in
Right.
housing. But how about government policy? I mean, we have advisors to the president, right? We have economic policy. Some of that must, and our politicians presumably are paying attention to that. What kind of economic misunderstandings? What kinds of economic fallacies would it be particularly dangerous to have, or do you think are particularly common in our government in terms of policy?
Well, I think putting too much faith into certain arguments. You know, Harry Truman always used to say that he wished there were more one-armed economists so that they couldn't always say, on the other hand, and that's an old joke, but it's actually a true quote, at least paraphrased. So that, you know, to think about some of these predictions, one of the most famous ones was in the beginning of the recession. The Obama administration is coming in. There's a lot of, you know, maybe a potential need for good news. The economic advisors come in and say, if you enact this stimulus, unemployment we don't expect will go much beyond 8%, which is very high, by the way. But and right off the bat, those predictions were way off, and they were made by very good economists. I mean, some of the best in the world. And so what went wrong? Well, a model has a certain, you know, a range of accuracy, and occasionally you're in the confidence interval, and sometimes you're not. And this past recession was one of those times where, for a lot of reasons, normal confidence intervals, if you want to call them that, weren't relevant. And you know, but understanding that going in, this recession looked like most other recessions in 2007. It looked no worse than the recession in 2001. And then there was the financial crisis in September of 2008. There was about 6 months where pretty much every economist in the world was just saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And that's how they, I mean, that was really literally the way people were reacting. Nobody had seen anything like this before. And 6 months later, we've seen the biggest decline in the economy in over 70 years. And so those sorts of events just don't come. Now, whether you call that a black swan event or this is just an event that occurred, a 100-year flood, or maybe, you know, maybe these are all things we should have seen, but we didn't understand what triggered it. And so, being regular human beings, we presume that this time is like last time. And, you know, there's a famous book now that, you know, this time is different. Right. That's the problem. We're only as good as our, you know, our experience in some cases.
Well, and our experience has been the kind of a cultural, social, political ideal has been full employment. Is that a thing of the past? I mean, that's the thing that really catches a lot of people's attention, right?
And
jobs.
Yeah.
Can we imagine a future in which full employment is not a realistic objective?
I think we can imagine one where full employment is a realistic objective. Okay. I don't think that that's going to happen in the next 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
We lost so many jobs in this last recession. One of the things that I go around talking to people about is this is the big problem. We all are in this instant gratification world. Okay, it's over. Let's go back to normal. Well, you know, this is more like falling down a really deep well and trying to struggle to get out of it. And it's going to take a long time to get back out. And so will we get to full employment? Eventually, but we could be talking about a decade. We could be talking about the next business cycle and another recession before we get there. So maybe this time around, we may not get back to full employment.
So maybe the bottom line for economics is the bottom line that comes on every prospectus, right?
Right, yeah.
Past performance is no guarantee of future returns.
That's exactly
maybe that's the lesson of economics.
That's absolutely the lesson learned, yeah.
Thanks so much for visiting with me today. I appreciate your time and your insights and your warnings about our gullibility, perhaps.
Right, maybe that's the most important one, right? Thanks.